Yes, like the title says, this is going to be a spoiler review. I am not interested in trying to do a spoiler-free review of the one movie that is the most filled with spoilers. I don't even know what I would say. So, this is your warning. Alright, let's go. So Spider-Man No Way Home is finally out, and I liked it. I think it's pretty hard not to like it, in fact. Is it the best Spider-Man movie ever? No, not to me, at least. But I still think this movie is kind of tailor-made to please the most amount of Spider-Man fans. If you love Tom Holland's Spider-Man, he is the best he has ever been. And if you hate him, this movie works really well at bringing him back to basics. And yes, in the worst kept secret of all time, this movie includes heroes and villains from past Spider-Man universes to mixed effect. You have standout stars like Molina and Dafoe who are so good it's crazy. And then you have some actors that clearly didn't want to show up for the movie, and it's a little distracting. Oh, why is Sandman just a vague sand outline of a man with awkwardly recorded dialogue? It's the same thing with the Lizard. I get that not everybody needs to be the best character ever, but it's a little distracting when I can tell that some of these guys aren't actually there. Electro is one character that is greatly improved if you compare him to his original iteration in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but the problem with his character in this movie is that, I'm just gonna come out and say it, I don't think Jamie Foxx is really that good of an actor. And to be fair, in this movie he doesn't really have to be. He's kind of the comic relief villain of the group. And honestly, the inclusion of the villains at all is so ambitious that you probably won't even mind. And when I say that Willem Dafoe is the most menacing and effective villain in a Spider-Man movie to this day, I mean it. And that's just in this movie. This is the scariest he's ever been, and honestly, I would have liked to see more of him. He steals the show as far as the villains go. And I really like that this movie is as dark as it is. I've liked all of the movies in the Home series so far, but deep down I have been waiting for the one movie where Tom Holland really gets to suffer. The stakes of his films have been a natural progression. First, he fights a guy who really doesn't want to kill him, but he will if he has to. And then he fights a guy who's more selfish and narcissistic than evil, but he has no issue with killing people who get in his way. And now he's fighting a guy who not only will kill people, but likes to kill people. For fun. And Peter understandably doesn't know what to do with that. Though I really like that Peter's plan in this movie is to rehabilitate the villains. This is the most accurate Spider-Man solution to this kind of problem. And at first when Aunt May says that they need to help all of the villains, I think everybody who watches this movie is like, well, that's not gonna fucking work. But they somehow do make it work, and it's perfect. This is exactly what Peter would do if he thought there was an option. This is him using great power responsibly. I also particularly like how this idea is challenged by Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange is here to be the true neutral character who wants to leave the villains to their fate. If they die, they die. And Peter is the chaotic good optimist who wants to try to save them because he knows that it's not impossible. The best thing in a superhero team-up is not just when the characters fight each other, but it's when their ideals are challenged. These two believe in very different things, and I like seeing that conflict here. And I do also like the actual fight that they have. It's a superhero movie tradition to have the characters fight if they're in a team-up, and I really like that Peter somehow wins. In the comics, Peter has a record of winning fights where he's outnumbered or outgunned just by using his wits and quick thinking. So I really liked this little brief but exciting tussle they had. But all this shit isn't what people want to talk about. This isn't what people want to see. This isn't the stuff that made this the most hotly anticipated movie of the year. It's the fact that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire have indeed returned with their portrayals of Spider-Man. For starters, I think it's safe to say that this movie has the secondary function of redeeming Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. And if you ask me, out of the three, he is the most accurate to comic book Spider-Man in this movie. He's snarky, overconfident, charming, and with a bit of sadness deep down that he's trying to fight past. Also, Andrew's charisma is just off the charts in this movie. In the background of some shots, you can see him still using Peter's body language and affectations. He still has the worst Spider-Man movie by a long shot, but he is so good here, so I don't really mind. And as such, he kind of overshadows Tobey just a little bit. Now, I'm not saying Tobey Maguire is bad by any means. I know you guys think that I hate Tobey Maguire and his Spider-Man movies, but I don't. He is still perfectly embodying his version of Peter Parker in this movie. He's the soft-spoken but more wizened Peter. His performance is straight out of the Raimi trilogy, and it doesn't really need to impress us as much because we already love him. But I will say that I do like that these guys only show up at the end of the movie. I said this would happen months ago before a trailer even released. And a lot of people said that I was wrong and that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire would be co-leads with Tom Holland. And I cannot imagine how weird that movie would be. This is Tom Holland's movie. Let this boy have his damn trilogy. He gets some help, he gets some guidance, but at the end of the day, this is very much his story. And I like that even when getting help from the other Spider-Men, he still calls the shots. Because this movie points out that Tom Holland's Peter is the one who is used to working as a team because he's been on the Avengers. So it makes perfect narrative sense why he's kind of the leader here. Yes, there are a lot of Spider-Men in this movie, but at the end of the day, this is Tom Holland's Peter's story. I just think the other Spideys are included perfectly. They don't overshadow Tom because it's still his big movie, but they still have cute banter, they get a nice scene where they all get to use their brains, and each Peter gets a moment to save the day in some way. The Gwen scene in particular really stands out as one of the best moments in the whole movie. However, one thing I noticed on my second watch of this movie is that this one does have some serious pacing issues, and it makes repeat watches a little less exciting. The first half of this movie is basically spoiled by the trailers. As such, I kind of found myself just waiting for the story to happen, because you can tell where it's gonna go. And yeah, the Ned, Peter, and MJ dynamic is very cute in this one, but I don't know, it felt like in the first half, this movie just drags a little bit. But by the end of the film, I found that I was pretty satisfied with how the story pans out, and I especially love the ending of this movie. This movie really brings Peter back to basics. Yes, for years I said that obviously Uncle Ben has to exist, they just haven't mentioned him yet. But this movie strongly implies that Uncle Ben never existed for this version of Peter, and that this is his origin story for this universe. Part of me thinks it's a little weird to use 3 movies to finally give Spider-Man his full origin story, but at the same time, part of me thinks it's actually kind of interesting and different for this character. By the end of this movie, Peter effectively dies and has all memory of Peter Parker erased from the world, and in doing so, he finally gets to actually become the Peter Parker that we're more used to. He lives in a shitty apartment, he doesn't have any connections to Stark Industries or the Avengers. After all this time, MCU Peter is finally Spider-Man. And at last, he has a shitty, homemade, classic Spider-Man costume. This movie is darker and more miserable, but with an equal amount of optimism and heart. I teared up multiple times, and even if it isn't a perfect movie, it is a very effective story. I do think Spider-Verse is still the best Spider-Man movie of all time, and it's going to take a lot to change that. And yeah, this is basically the Spider-Man fan service movie, but I think that's okay. I see it the same way that I see Endgame. I don't really see Endgame as a film that you sit and scrutinize with the same lens that you do other movies. It's a big event, it's meant to be fan service, it's supposed to just appeal to your base animal instincts of hype and excitement. And sometimes, every once in a while, it's okay for a movie to make you feel that way. Movies like this are more of a spectacle, and this one in particular is an effective spectacle. So like Endgame, I don't really see any reason to give this a number score. All I'm going to say is that I liked it. It's a lot of fun, and if you at any point in your life have loved a Spider-Man movie before, you will probably like this too.